Thanks for joining me this week on my literary adventure. This video focusing on what I think is going to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest pieces on my list for this year, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Before we get into it, I did want to mention one of the purposes I had for this series that was remiss of me not to mention in the last video. Like I said in that video, none of these essays are going to be particularly robust reviews, but instead I hope this kind of discussion will serve to inspire you all to take up these books and read them for yourselves. So these videos are more or less going to be teasers for that purpose. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. The background for Sun as a historical figure is sparse, and as such there isn't much to talk about him. But what we do know is that he was probably born in 544 BC, or at least this is traditionally seen as his birth date, and likewise his death traditionally being seen as occurring in 496 BC. During this time, it's said that Sun served as a military advisor to King Helu of the Wu province, with the book we're going over now being compiled sometime in the following 2 centuries. My belief is that many of the teachings were circulated by word of mouth or tradition until they were instantiated in a compiled written form, but I could be wrong on that, it's just a guess. The first thing I noticed was how high up in the abstract realm this book and its teachings were kept, and kept there very purposefully. The advantage to this being that its wisdom could be applied to many different situations effectively, although sometimes it can be hard to squeeze out what's intended to be taught without good examples, which are many times provided by the commentary read in parallel to the original text, originating from a handful of other Chinese generals who had studied Sun's words and related them very readily to their own experience. On a side note, I was actually unaware of how short the actual text was, with most of what I read in the book being about 75% commentary on the original text. One of the core philosophies exemplified in this work is what I would consider a pacifist pragmatism towards warring, somewhat oxymoronic, I'll admit. To quote Sun himself, "Troops that bring an enemy to heel without fighting at all, that is ideal." Now this is a stark contrast to what would be traditionally seen as a soldier's approach to war, in which he focuses on being good at fighting for the purposes of winning battles. I think a wise general should see a battle as a failure to properly calculate, plan, and strategize, although at times being an inevitable failure. Encompassed in this pacifist pragmatism is also the general's responsibility to the common people to make sure the state is not thrown into chaos and poverty, because almost every facet of war burdens the common people. The key difference in this light between an effective military leader and a wise one, I would say, is that some leaders may see war as valuable enough in and of itself to partake in, but a wise one will only see the end of a war with the most gains possible and the least amount of death on both sides as valuable. Much of the book's content is purposed behind this philosophy, and I would even posit that a stark warning should be accompanied with the text. The capability to decimate an enemy, which this book purports to give you, should always be carefully and cautiously meditated on. There's a clear danger in taking on strength without a philosophy to buttress against the ego that can accompany that process. This is not a critique against Sun, because I want to be clear that he does a good job of infusing those warnings that I talked about against these pitfalls. Constantly the text alludes to having a balanced mind between gains and losses, to the benefits and costs to every decision. I would even argue that the efficacy of this ancient military strategy only exists because it was built up out of a pragmatically true philosophy. This idea of an articulated military theory being a conduit for a deeper fundamental ethic reminds me of one of the great insights of Nietzsche. In his book Beyond Good and Evil, he criticizes thinkers' propensity to restate fundamental presuppositions, their presuppositions, as newly discovered ethics, recast in order to be proposed as self-evident truths. However, I think the same thing happens here with Sun's work, but in a very positive and genuine way. What I mean by this is that, while his military theory is quite sound and effective, there is nothing in the concretized advice, for example the discussion of particular circumstances or wartime necessities, that would give any ground to stand on in order to come to a conclusion of what a wise leader should do in response to those particularities. An outside or independently existing ethic needs to be well understood and given credence in the mind of leaders more than anything else. You can be the most intelligent general and win every battle, but without wisdom, which does not correlate with intelligence at all, you will surely lose the war, or at least make your victory unsure. Now for me, this relates to another philosophical idea from the last 100 years, which really shows just how profound this book is. What I'm going to assume is Sun's most famous quote, "Know your enemy and know yourself, and fight 100 battles without danger," closely relates to the idea in Jungian psychology of incorporating your shadow. For those unaware, I think it's best summed up as this. Your shadow is where all of your attributes that you refuse to admit about yourself are metaphysically located. In my experience, though, both positive and negative, both good and evil attributes can be relegated to our shadows. It's not until we can be honest and genuine with ourselves and properly integrate our shadow that we can begin to cultivate a vision of wisdom in whatever we have tasked ourselves with doing, wartime efforts being no exception to this. And I think Sun was well aware of the necessity to be genuine in your endeavors. In his own words, "If you do not seek fame when advancing, and do not shrink from blame when retreating, working only to protect your men and makes your gains complete for your ruler, you are a state treasure." I'm trying to keep this video short and sweet. I think any further commentary beyond this point would be redundant and would produce diminishing returns. So on that note, I hope you enjoyed this commentary. Leave a like and subscribe if you want more of this kind of content, and check out my other videos in the playlist. Next week, we can all look forward to one of the more profound books on my list, The Archetypes and Collective Unconscious by Carl Jung. I have no idea how I'm going to finish that one in a week, or even what I'll have to offer you all from it, but it will certainly be an interesting experiment for me. If you're interested in The Art of War, I'll be linking it in the description below, and I highly recommend reading it and coming to your own insights from the text. Again, the artwork for this video was provided by my sister, whose Instagram is linked below as well. Check her out, she's got some really cool stuff on there. And she even does commissions if you're interested in something for yourself. Take care, guys. Have a good one.